Welcome to Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Let's get right to the week's top stories. In what is undeniably a heart-pounding, white-knuckle, tight presidential race. And that can mean one thing. It's time to bring in the closers, time to unleash the Democrats' singular political talent to make an urgent case for this moment.
What I cannot understand is why anybody would think that Donald Trump will shake things up in a way that is good for you, Pennsylvania. I don't understand that. Because there is absolutely no evidence that this man thinks about anybody but himself. I've said it before. Donald Trump is a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems since he rode down his golden escalator 9 years ago. You've got the tweets in all caps, the ranting and the raving about crazy conspiracy theories. You got the 2-hour speeches, word salad, just, you know, it's like Fidel Castro, just on and on. Constant attempts to sell you stuff. Who does that? Selling you gold sneakers and a $100,000 watch and most recently a Trump Bible. You know, he wants you to buy the Word of God, Donald Trump edition. He got his name right there next to Matthew and Luke. I mean, you could not make this stuff up. If you saw it on Saturday Night Live, you'd say, well, no, that's going too far. No, he's doing that. It's crazy. And the reason he does it is because all he cares about is his ego and his money and his status. He's not thinking about you. If Donald Trump does not care that a mob might attack his own vice president, do you think he cares about you?
President Barack Obama at that rally last night in Pittsburgh doing what he does better than just about anyone, shrinking Donald Trump way down to size, puncturing Trump's toxic, divisive, self-centered nonsense by laying out the facts and using humor. But President Obama didn't just deploy humor. He also did something rather rare for him, showing a flash of anger, of frustration that is deeply relatable. Here he is talking about Trump's lies about hurricane relief efforts.
The idea of intentionally trying to deceive people in their most desperate and vulnerable moments. And my question is, when did that become okay? I'm not looking for applause right now. I want to ask Republicans out there, you know, people who are conservative, who didn't vote for me, who didn't agree with me. I had friends who disagreed with me on every issue. When did that become okay? Why would we go along with that?
You know who he's talking to. When did that become okay, guys? What President Obama did last night and what he will continue to do as he campaigns, as he barnstorms for Vice President Kamala Harris across the battleground states in the coming weeks, is to rally enthusiasm and support for her campaign, yes, but to also give voters a permission structure to do what he did, to shrink Trump down to size, a permission structure to call out what's gone on for 9 years now, the normalizing of Trump's pathological need to, as President Obama puts it, deceive people in their most desperate and vulnerable moments. And then, again, this only a political athlete of his caliber can do. President Obama went in for a surgical political strike and decided to speak at a public event directly to African-American men in Pittsburgh.
we have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. Now, I also want to say that that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. When on the one hand you have somebody who grew up like you, knows you, went to college with you, who's had to work harder and do more and overcome. And that's on one side. And on the other side, you have someone who has consistently shown disregard, not just for the communities, but for you as a person. And you're thinking about sitting out, and you're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that because part of it makes me think, I'm speaking to men directly, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for them. These aren't ordinary times, and these are not ordinary elections. You'd like your Michelle's not here.
Straight talk, a direct call to action for President Obama to black men, call to action to anyone who cares about the truth and empathy from a messenger who is second to none in terms of rallying a winning coalition and speaking to the conscience of our great country. It's where we start today with Democratic strategist and president of Brilliant Corners Research, Cornell Belcher, and with me at the table for the hour, president of the National Action Network, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, the Reverend Al Sharpton. What'd you think?
I thought it was great. I really think that President Obama spoke directly in both settings that you showed. And I think in a way that only he could do it. Let's not forget that he was the president during the good times or better times that Donald Trump tries to take credit for. He handed Donald Trump a stable economy that he undermined. So all you have to say to black men is look at what unemployment had went down to under Obama. Look where it went under Trump. Look where student debt went. Look where criminal justice went. Trump was president during George Floyd, during Breonna Taylor, during Ahmaud Arbery, all of this. What did he do? What did Joe Biden and Harris do when they got in office on cases? So if you look at the facts, they clearly can't say that there's a reason to go with Donald Trump or sit this out and let a guy who's been antithetical. Central Park 5 wanted to have people executed that were innocent and never said anything different. Says he stands by it now. Call black nations, African nations, and Haiti S-hole countries. On and on. As late as yesterday saying if Harris gets elected, the whole country will be like Detroit, which is racial overtones then. So I understand black young men that feel disaffected, but you're going to be disaffected against somebody that has done everything but call you the N-word in public? Yeah, it's got to be some misogyny there. It has to be some, are you against women? And I think that President Obama was the right one to bring the message. The other thing that I think that we keep missing here is that Donald Trump is not a newcomer. He has a record. Why do you think he's going to do now what he didn't do in the 4 years he was there for blacks? I mean, he's telling blacks he'll do what? You had 4 years to do it, and you did nothing but call us names and ignore George Floyd and others until you went in front of a church with a Bible and lectured the protesters and never said a word about the police who on tape killed a man unarmed.
Cornell, if I could sort of just try to turn this over to both of you, because I have a problem whenever it falls to, and maybe this is my own status as a political refugee in the pro-democracy coalition, but it shouldn't fall to black women or black men to save the country from Donald Trump. But when you look at where this contest is, it might. And I want to get you to speak to, with your knowledge, how big of a political problem this is right now that President Obama did that so publicly. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly where the cameras were, and he knew exactly what he was saying. And it felt like he invoked Michelle at a strategic moment as well. But just lay out what the strategic exercise is over the next 25 days.
No, thank you for that. But Nicole, first, I want to level set because there's a lot of ridiculousness out there. So first, before I build on that, I actually do want to level set. So if you go back to 2008 and 2012, I was a part of the Obama campaign. And what you saw, Nicole, and the Revs knows this, better than anyone, is that you saw for the first time in our history that Black voters became the most likely voter in the electorate. Meaning that Black turnout actually outpaced that of white turnout, which was historical in the shadow of the anniversary of the Civil Rights, Voting Rights Act. African Americans actually turnout in 2008 and 2012 was higher than that of whites. In 2012 was 3 points higher. What's happened since then? Go to 2016, it dropped back down, 3 or 4 points below that of whites. Go to 2022, and it's 11 points. So you do have African Americans pulling back from turnout. What did we do in 2008 and 2012, which I think the campaign needs to do now, is actually give these people something to vote for, right? I hear the conversation about Donald Trump is horrible and he's racist, but Nicole, I can tell you right now, I sit in focus groups sometimes and I hear undecided or African Americans who are still on the fence go, yeah, this is not about Donald Trump. I'm never going to vote for Donald Trump, but I'm hurting economically. And what I would simply say is, just like any other voting group, the African American man or African American, and I don't think it's more than just men. I think it's more of a sort of a younger African American sort of cohort who's more problematic because that's where the turnout has dropped off the most. Is they need an economic argument for why to vote for her, right? And just like you would do with any group, give them a forward, inclusive, economic message that speaks specifically to their angst and their hopes and the challenges that they have in their life, which is different. And I think you'll move those voters just like you move any other voter. And now, to your last point, yes, it's going to come down to I think, the African American voters, because in Michigan and Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin, Nicole, if you tell me what the African American turnout is on election day, if you tell me that African American turnout in Wisconsin and Milwaukee, which has seen the most dramatic drops in turnout, you tell me that Black voters are turning out in Milwaukee at the same rate as white voters are turning out, I'm going to tell you she's going to win. She's going to win Wisconsin, because the majority of white voters, in fact, are not going to vote for her. And we've seen this. Like, what did Biden get? Biden got roughly 41% of the white vote. The vast majority of white voters voted against him, but we have a browning electorate, which means that those Black and Hispanic and Asian voters are more and more important to the coalition and can define what states we win or lose in.
Still ahead for us today. Policy and empathy on full display last night at a town hall in Nevada from Vice President Kamala Harris, where she was seeking to strike that balance before vitally important Hispanic voters. We'll play some of what she had to say last night.
You and I have something in common. We both lost our mother. Oh. And I'm an American citizen, born to two Mexican parents. They were here before I was even born. They've worked their whole lives. But with the way immigration laws change over time, I was only able to help my dad get his legal status squared away, but not my mom's. My mom passed away just 6 weeks ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And she was never, ever able to get the type of care and service that she needed or deserved. Sorry.
Take your time. Take your time.
So my question for you is, what are your plans, or do you have plans to support that subgroup of immigrants who have been here their whole lives, or most of them, and have to live and die in the shadows?
I'm so sorry for you.
Thank you.
You must remember your mother as she lived.
Mm-hmm.
I have enough of a feeling about your strength that it probably comes from her to know she would want you to remember her as she lived and not as she died, okay?
You don't get to rehearse for moments like that. I worked for politicians who went to town halls. They don't know what they're going to face. Not everybody would react like that in the face of someone's unbearable grief, having lost their mother 6 weeks ago. It was an important thing for everyone to see and really take in. An incredible moment last night at Vice President Harris's town hall with Univision. Harris used the night and the format and the unscripted questions to take whatever came at her from undecided Latino voters. The intense and emotional questions she faced gave her a chance to do all sorts of things, to share her policies, to show her empathy and her humanity, while making her case to a vital block of voters ahead of this election. We're back with the Rev and Alicia. I had read the verbatim of that. I hadn't seen it, and it's what people are dealing with is so much more important than anything that Donald Trump is offering. And I understand the conversation we had. You know, I understand that there are people who don't feel spoken to or reached. Or we're not talking to the microphone. I'm going to steal that and use that. But what people are really dealing with deserves serious people. And I thought back to the vice president's line in her convention speech. He's an unserious man.
Right. And to see that moment of connection between her and the woman who asked the question, that moment happened early in the town hall, and it really set the pace for what would be the rest of the town hall. Very thoughtful, considerate. She talks about a lot of policies, including immigration, talking about inflation, about price gouging, things that Latino voters care about. What I found so interesting beyond the empathy that Donald Trump would never have been able to communicate when faced with a similar question was this was a reminder that the entire conversation about immigration has shifted to the U.S.-Mexico border, and that is, in fact, an important issue. There are a lot of voters who care about what is happening at the U.S.-Mexico border, but there are also millions of immigrants on the interior of this country, like that young woman's mother who've lived here and made their lives here. And to me, it sort of reflected how fraught our discourse around immigration has become in this country, that sort of extended answer that the vice president gives beyond connecting with that voter. She pivoted to the bipartisan border deal. She talked about prosecuting cartels in her former role in California. But she chose not to lean into the things that the Biden-Harris administration has done for immigrants, just like that woman's mother. She didn't talk about protecting DACA recipients at a time when Republican AGs are suing to rescind DACA. She didn't talk about parole in place, the effort to allow undocumented folks who are married to an American citizen to stay in this country legally. She didn't talk about TPS designation, which Project 2025 wants to just get rid of writ large. She didn't talk about the fact that at the Republican National Convention, you had a sea of people holding up signs that said mass deportations now, which those weren't homemade signs.
Right.
Those were signs that were produced and paid for by a political party in the image of Donald Trump. So this was a beautiful moment, I think a reminder of where we find ourselves when it comes to talking about this incredibly complex issue, and also a reminder that we've slipped into their frame. Immigration is not just about what is happening at the border. It is also about the people who make this country alive and vibrant and well.
Why do you think she didn't talk about any of those other things?
I think she's afraid that there is a political price, that she is not able to maintain her strength on the border while simultaneously saying we can be a nation that is orderly, warm, and welcoming to immigrants.
I mean, 3 words: Ronald Reagan, John McCain, and George W. Bush. They were all for amnesty at different points of different negotiations and different failed. In the case of McCain and Bush, different failed. I mean, I think it's an opportunity to show how extreme and radical the Republican Party is. I mean, what McCain and Bush were for in 04 or 05, was comprehensive immigration reform, which dealt with, at that time, there were 11 to 17 million people, as her mother was, living in the shadows. Or is it your feeling that the politics are too soundbitey and shallow?
Yes, I mean, correct. And I think she knows that she's walking a tightrope here, which is, you ask a lot of Americans about this. I also think the polling around this gets very murky, right? That I think we've sat here at this table and talked about that number, that if you ask people if they want to see a mass deportation, an alarming number of Americans say yes. I don't think we are being specific enough about whether or not we are talking about 11 million people on the interior of this country who you know because they live next door to you and your kids go to school with them. I happen to feel differently even than those folks about the desperate people who are coming to the U.S.-Mexico border. But I think we have misunderstood what a lot of American voters are trying to tell us when they are asked that question about immigration. And what they want, they want to see people do something. They want people to be serious. And that is why she pivots to the bipartisan border deal, because there was an opportunity to do something and there was an opportunity to be serious. And Donald Trump tanked it because he likes this as a political issue.
Well, and he killed it and bragged about it. I mean, it's also like Donald Trump's bragging in the E. Jean Carroll deposition about being able to grab women between the legs. It's still his position today as we eat and breathe and live, that for in his telling 1 million years, that's what famous people can do. To Alicia's point, he is going harder and darker because he thinks the shallowness, and it's dehumanization. He thinks that dehumanizing legal residents, legal immigrants living in Springfield, Ohio, and he's targeted all sorts of communities all over the battleground states, is a winning political strategy. What, in your view, is the best response?
I think the best response is to lay out exactly what he's saying and why it's against the interests of American people. I think when Alicia talks about 11 million people, well, let's also talk about the cost of that. How are you going to pay for that? And who's going to pay for it? The guy that was going to build the wall that Mexico was going to pay for, that's still not there. I mean, you need to be able to take it down, but take down his arguments, take down the absurdity of what he's saying, and then deal with the humanity of what he's saying, which is what this young lady's question was. And I would contrast, I would have an ad out tonight if I was in the Harris campaign, showing her compassion for that young lady and him throwing paper towels at people in Puerto Rico after a hurricane. I mean, he literally threw towels at people like he couldn't touch them. You've got to show the reason their policies are so bad is they don't care about the people, and they don't care about any people. And her empathy came through, which I think you're right. You couldn't rehearse that. Kamala Harris not only has a policy message and they have a track record that I agree they've got to be concerned about. Do they play into the right wing, into the Fox News just taking a clip saying she said this, that, or the other? Yeah. But they also have empathy that is really her, anybody that knows her.
Bombshell new reporting about the disgraced ex-president's bizarrely intimate relationship with Vladimir Putin. It comes from Bob Woodward's new book that Donald Trump sent COVID tests to Vladimir Putin for his personal use in 2020, while the people he led scrambled to find them. That really happened. There's more where that came from. The latest examples of Trump's inexplicable obsession and affinity with one of the world's authoritarians later. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Everybody was scrambling to get these kits, the tests, the COVID test kits.
You couldn't get them.
Couldn't get them.
Right.
Couldn't get them anywhere.
Right.
And this guy who is president of the United States is sending them to Russia, to a murderous dictator for his personal use? The point being, that is just the most recent, stark example of who Donald Trump is, that he secretly sent COVID test kits for the personal use of Putin, of Russia, an adversary to the United States, when he was talking about Americans should be putting bleach in their blood.
If you made it up, nobody would believe you. That was Vice President Harris today reacting to this unbelievable, surreal new reporting in the forthcoming book by Bob Woodward that at the height of the coronavirus pandemic, While Donald Trump was the president of the United States of America in 2020, Trump, quote, secretly sent Putin a bunch of Abbott point-of-care COVID test machines for his personal use. It was a favor to the murderous dictator of Russia, who was infamously terrified of contracting COVID. But as Vice President Kamala Harris pointed out, Americans here were struggling to get access to tests themselves because there was a shortage at the time. Woodward writes that Putin was worried about how this revelation would damage Trump politically. Putin telling Trump this, quote, I don't want you to tell anybody because people will get mad at you, not me. And the personal relationship between the two, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, has persisted, maybe deepened, over the last 4 years, with Woodward reporting that Donald Trump has secretly spoken to Vladimir Putin as many as 7 times since leaving office. While the Trump campaign dismissed Woodward's book in a statement today, they did not address any of the specifics reported in it by Woodward. Joining our coverage, NBC News Chief International Analyst, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, Admiral James Stavridis, is here. He's the author of a brand new book, The Restless Wave, a novel of the United States Navy. Also joining our conversation, Rick Stengel, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs during the Obama administration. 7 times. I don't think Melania has appeared with Trump 7 times in public in the 4 years.
I have kind of 2 immediate reactions. One is, this sounds immodest, but you'll get my point. I have received 50 medals over the years, 28 from foreign nations. The decoration I'm the proudest of, Nicole, is being sanctioned by the Kremlin. So I back up to nobody in my loathing for Vladimir Putin. And, you know, I just published this novel. It's impossible to think about the fictional element of this. You'd have to really struggle to come up with a plot line like this, and outrageous doesn't begin to get at it.
Well, you know, spoken to him 7 times in the 4 years since Trump left office. Donald Trump was charged with stealing classified documents, and Vladimir Putin publicly planned a war against Ukraine. Do you have any national security concerns?
Oh, of course. And, you know, let's back up and examine who is Vladimir Putin. He is a murderer. He is someone who has absolutely used every tool to suppress his own people. He's kidnapped Americans and effectively held them for ransom. Evan Gershkovich. It is an absolutely loathsome individual. So why a former president of the United States would be in frequent communication? Yes, I have national security concerns. And let me close with this. Let me tell you for sure, the Russians have recorded every bit of that conversation. And I bow to my good friend Rick Stengel in terms of the public relations of this, but can you spell compromise, the ability of Russia to potentially blackmail a former and possibly the next president? It's quite shocking.
Well, I mean, we're back to, I mean, I guess in 2016 it was a P-tape, but we're back to the question. I mean, you use that word. It's something that has hung over Donald Trump since he stepped into public life.
You know, I've often tried the thought experiment that goes as follows. Donald Trump is an agent of Vladimir Putin. Prove the opposite. I mean, there's no evidence.
I usually go with useful idiot, but keep going.
There's no evidence that he's not a kind of oligarch out of the country for Vladimir Putin. The 7 phone calls, I don't understand why people are not talking about the Logan Act. The Logan Act, clearly, it's a clear violation. We are talking to a leader of a hostile foreign power and maybe affecting U.S. foreign policy. That's something that people should think about. But, you know, this goes so far back, goes back to the 1980s, goes back to the fact that he married a Czechoslovakian woman when Czechoslovakia was behind the Iron Curtain. They not only are recording those phone calls, as Jim said, they've been open to file for him back in the 80s, from the time he was trying to open a Trump Tower in Moscow, when he brought the Miss Universe contest to Moscow in the 1980s and said, Putin loves me. I mean, it's really strange, and someday, I hope, when some KGB officer defects, we'll find out the true story.
7 phone calls with Vladimir Putin. I mean, what are your, if you someone said you can listen to all 7 of them, I mean, what's the theory on it?
It's funny. Well, we have, heard phone calls that he's had with foreign leaders, like the Zelensky phone call. And there was that terrific story in the New York Times today about the Hamburg conference.
Yeah, we had Mark Mazzetti here yesterday.
In 2017. Yeah. And what you find about the conversations is one guy is talking 97% of the time. That's Vladimir Putin. And one guy is listening. And so what was so upsetting about the Hamburg thing is that he was coached to go in there. You have to defend Ukraine. You have to defend U.S. interests. And he actually asked Putin the question, do you think I should be giving aid to Ukraine? This is maybe the worst presidential negotiation in American history from a guy who claims to be a good negotiator. So I think Putin is talking his ear off and he's listening.
Up next, Donald Trump knows the importance of the state of Michigan and the voters there. So we're wondering what he was thinking and why he would insult the people of Michigan who live there while he trashed the biggest city in the state. How the Harris campaign is answering that and responding.
The whole country is going to be like, you want to know the truth? It'll be like Detroit. Our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president. You're going to have a mess on your hands.
Taken by itself, the comment is nasty and has undertones of racism, as the Reverend Al Sharpton said. It's unnecessary and cruel. But when you think about it in the context of where and when it happened, it's a massive political story and scandal. Because it happened in Detroit. The man currently campaigning to lead the United States of America went to a major American city, the biggest city in Michigan, and disparaged that city to its own residents. As expected, those who live and work and call Detroit and Michigan home snap back with pride from the city's mayor, Mike Duggan. Quote, Detroit just hosted the largest NFL draft in history. The Tigers are back in the playoffs. The Lions are headed to the Super Bowl. Crime is down and our population is growing. Lots of cities should be like Detroit. And we did it all without Trump's help. Michigan's Attorney General Dana Nessel said this, quote, this guy is calling us ugly and then asking us out on a date. We all know that guy. And the state's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, stood by the Motor City, quote, Detroit is the epitome of grit, defined by winners willing to get their hands dirty to build up their city and create their communities, something Donald Trump could never understand. So keep Detroit out of your mouth. And you better believe Detroiters won't forget this in November. Donald Trump repeatedly criticizes New York City while he was here for his fraud and criminal trials. And this summer, he called Milwaukee horrible right before the city of Milwaukee hosted him and the Republican National Convention. At least that time he panned the city before he physically arrived in it. But his Detroit attack makes no sense even for him, given that we're 25 days from Election Day, and Michigan's 16 electoral votes are key to clinching victory in the presidential race for both campaigns. Trump knows how important the state is. He won it by only 10,000 votes in 2016, and he lost it to President Joe Biden in 2020. Right now, the polls in Michigan show Trump and Vice President Harris locked in a dead heat for that state. One new survey out this week shows Donald Trump with a 3-point lead, and another shows the two candidates tied. So at this moment, every vote, especially in Michigan and even in Detroit, counts mightily, except to Donald Trump. Vice President Harris making sure Trump's comments are not missed. This brand new ad will air during the Detroit Lions and Detroit Tigers games this weekend. Watch.
They said we were dead.
Detroit waving the white flag, the city filing for bankruptcy.
That our best days were behind us. That living here is like
living in hell.
But you know what we said? We said, F that. We rebuilt ourselves. We looked out for each other, got our hands dirty, and put in the hard work. And this guy He don't know anything about that. We are a city of winners, of up-and-comers, of builders. The Motor City. Bigger and better. Here, we believe in freedom. We don't bow down to nobody, and we never will. And so what Donald Trump doesn't understand, or care to learn, is that when he said,
our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president,
that he should be so goddamn lucky.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow and Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. Madam Attorney General, I start with you. Your reaction.
Wow. It's just really an interesting tactic to try to get people from the state of Michigan who love the city of Detroit to try to come out and vote for him by disparaging a city that's been through some really tough times, but is one that has really recovered incredibly. And I would suggest this. I mean, Detroit, unfortunately, did go through a bankruptcy about a decade ago, but it's really rebounded since then. Trump, on the other hand, has been through 6 bankruptcies, and I don't think he's done nearly as well as we have here in the city of Detroit.
Against every measure, he shrinks. Madam State Senator, your thoughts?
I mean, what a tactic. I don't think any of us should be surprised at this point, but every day it still is surprising. It's like inviting a friend into your house and they look around and tell you how much of a dump it is, and then they expect to be invited back. Look, what I heard here was dog whistling and Trump trying to divide Americans against each other and Michiganders against Michiganders. This is a time when the city of Detroit is thriving, and all of us, no matter where you live in the state of Michigan, are benefiting from that. The fact that we had hundreds of thousands of people come in for the NFL draft to experience the city for the first time and share how lovely and wonderful it is. You know, I think that Donald Trump is trying to lean into a time that no longer exists here in Michigan. We all have each other's backs, and we're not going to let him divide us against each other.
Well, let me ask both of you, where in your view, with your expertise and your knowledge of bumper stickers and yard signs and having stood before the voters of Michigan, where you think the race stands right now? You first, Madam Attorney General.
I think it's tight. You know, there's a lot of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris and a lot of excitement for her. And I'm going to be interested to see as the early votes, the absentee votes start to come in, where those votes are coming from. But I will say this. I was in Detroit all last weekend campaigning for Kamala Harris, and I think people are really energized to get out to the polls. But as Senator McMorrow indicated, Trump is really trying to divide us against each other. And to some extent, in some areas, unfortunately, his continual lies and misrepresentations sometimes have an impact. And we just have to remember that in the state of Michigan, it's a very purple state, but there are more Democrats than Republicans. And as long as people come out to the polls, Michigan is going to continue to go blue in presidential elections.
I mean, Senator McMorrow, it's the second time I've heard this since I've been on the air, that the outcome in November will be determined by who turns out. And so I view this just in the political malpractice category as a double foul. I mean, Trump offended people in the state. And I feel like when it's your state, the city is sort of like your family member, where like you can tell them you don't like how they've done their hair, but nobody else can. And so I want to show you how Governor Tim Walz is using this and deploying it.
Just yesterday, Donald Trump was in Detroit, and he said, our whole country will end up being Detroit. You're going to have a mess on your hands. Well, look, I know you don't, that's not unexpected for him. That's exactly what he's going to do, tear down America. But if the guy would have ever spent any time in the Midwest, like all of us know, we'd know Detroit's experiencing American comeback and renaissance. Look, I'm a Twins fan, and you whipped our ass. We know where this is. Detroit's there, so we know. City's growing, crime's down, factories are opening up. But those guys, all they know about manufacturing is manufacturing. every time they show up.
This was as blunt as it is, and that was, I mean, everyone loves an American comeback story, and Senator Morrow, he seems to have missed, I mean, he's missing a lot of marks, and I'll show you that, and we'll have that conversation as well. But this feels pivotal in a state that takes a lot of pride in its comeback as well.
I think that's exactly right. And to me, this is a really ugly example of what he is trying to do, which is Donald Trump is actively trying to whip up white votes by convincing white people, maybe who don't live in Detroit, that something nefarious is happening. We saw this happen in 2020 when Donald Trump pressured members of the Michigan GOP to descend on the absentee counting center in Detroit. And you saw those visuals of largely white people not from Detroit banging on the glass, intimidating largely black election workers. And he's trying to do it again. He's trying to dog whistle, but he's missing the moment because right now all of Michigan is celebrating Detroit's comeback. We are all rooting for the Tigers. We're all rooting for the Lions. We're all rooting for our city and how beautiful it is because we understand that Michigan does not succeed if Detroit doesn't succeed. So he's lost. You know, he's trying to make America great again to a time that is long gone and needs to just stay in the ash heap of history.
This has been Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Please tune into Deadline White House and all of our primetime shows weekdays on MSNBC.